Welcome to the Relationship Cycle with Jorge and Nelsa, where we discuss dating and other significant relationships.
Good evening. Good evening.
Hola, papi. Hola. Great show set up for today. Back with the Relationship Cycle with Jorge and Nelsa. Thanks to everybody who's listening and following us on YouTube, subscribing, hitting those like buttons. Sometimes we do that at the end of the show, Poppy. And I really wanted to say thank you tonight up front because we have some of the best listeners, really. And tonight we're going to have a great show for our listeners again. We just discussed couples therapy not too long ago and talking about the benefits of that, how it can help your relationship and whatnot. And so we've got a therapist in with us tonight, and I'm really excited about the show. So before we start the interview, I just want to do a little brief introduction. Cyndi Ixchele is a licensed clinical mental health counselor, licensed school counselor, and a certified Reiki master here in North Carolina. She's the owner of Innovations, PLLC, a therapeutic private practice where she invites her clients to examine and reshape the conversations within. Cyndi Ixchele received her EDS and MA in mental health counseling from Gardner-Webb University and her BA in psychology from Queen's University. And we're going to share, her contact information and everything in her show notes and on our promo. But I'm excited about this because, we really wanted to get into like family, couples counseling, that kind of thing. And we're going to get a chance to do that tonight. So everyone, please hold on until after this break. And we're back. So we're excited. Again, like I said, we're going to have Cyndi on talking about couples therapy. And Cyndi, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nelsa.
Hi, we're so glad to have you. Jorge is on the line as well, and we're looking forward to getting your take as a licensed mental health therapist on couples therapy. We've done one show on that already, Cyndi. We just talked about it a little bit. Just kind of recapping a little bit about what we talked about in the first show.
Okay.
But one of the first questions I'd like to ask you is, do you think as a therapist that couples therapy is important, especially before couples get too far down the road?
I do. I think couples therapy could be a good way to create boundaries and kind of pre-maintain the relationship, if you will, right? So sometimes, we don't know the questions to ask until we're in something. So I think going to a couples counseling session could equip couples with things they haven't thought about that may be important to talk about before they get too far in.
Cyndi, let me ask you something. Hi, this is Jorge. So I know that I feel like in society, we tend to kind of have a reactive mentality, and normally you don't see people, particularly individuals or even couples, go to counseling or seek therapy unless things are going wrong. However, you as a professional in this field, would you recommend even new couples to consider therapy even before, they move in or before they, get into a committed relationship together? What's your take on that?
Um, Glad you asked that question. Yes, I do. I have two sons, one who recently got married in March of this year. And I encouraged he and his wife to go ahead and secure a therapist, to go ahead and build relationship with that therapist when the time comes. Because there will be the time when you'll need to go and seek out some type of professional help in regards to, it could be about job situations. It could be about living arrangements. The chores are things that typically come up. How do we do life together? because it changes, after we get through that first year and a half, the marriage where it's kind of euphoric, it can last all the way
Mhm.
for 18 months. Then things start to settle in. We get back into our routines.
Yep.
I always think it's a great way to safeguard the relationship to go ahead and secure the therapist, because I don't know if you've had therapy before, but the relationship is so important and feeling comfortable. So even the pursuit and the hunt, if you will, for finding a therapist sometimes is not right away. So it's good to have it in your pocket, in the back pocket, when things might change, and things do change because we evolve. And so
Mhm.
the ways that we present ourselves to each other probably are authentic in that moment, right? But as we grow and evolve and learn and have experiences, we change. So the ways that we are with each other in the beginning won't be the ways that we are with each other in the long haul. That evolves over time. So if you have a therapist in your back pocket, then it's not, an added stress. And then, there's less room for someone to say, well, you find a therapist. It becomes maybe a one-sided type conversation. So when things are good, it's always great to secure the therapist then.
And that both of you can connect to, right?
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
I like the word safeguard. The way you use that for the relationship, like you're putting up, a buffer. As you know, hard times are going to come. Like you say, life happens. The death of children, the death of parents, um, all sorts of things, pandemics. Go figure.
Hmm.
So I really like that thought, because that proactive, mentality is really what helps us in the long run, if we can shore up before things happen. But again, like we said, too often people are reactive. So what do you think? What's the first, like, sign that maybe we should get a therapist, from just maybe what you've seen in your practice?
When people
What are some
start
early warning signs,
communication, the lack thereof,
Right.
change, the way that we communicate, either we stop communicating or we communicate differently. Those are the first signs. And even before communication, even if you're able to be aware of your own personal thoughts, perhaps you're looking at your spouse
Mm.
differently. Maybe you're thinking things within your mind differently, perhaps, the
Like, you
toilet
make me
lid.
sick.
Right, right. Like the
When it
toilet
used to
lid
be,
might be
oh, I
left up.
love that
That
man.
used to be so cute, the toilet
Right.
lid. But now that's getting on your nerves. And so then you're having not only thoughts about the toilet lid being left up, but then you're having thoughts about your spouse or your loved one that you didn't have before. And
Hmm.
so after those start to collect, we have to be careful, because that can build up resentment. And then there's the wall that comes up,
Mm.
right? And you are projecting negativity onto your relationship. So,
Cyndi, let me ask you something. So I would say in my circle, there are people that listen. First and foremost, me and Nelsa, we beat this horse till we'll blue in the face that we are
Right.
not experts. But you see people going through stuff, and you're like, hey, you know what? Like, maybe getting counseling or getting therapy would be a good idea. Just from outside looking in, you might need a professional to kind of help you out of this funk. But how do you present this option to someone in a way that it's not frowned upon? Because I feel like there's still a lot of people that kind of have that, they get hung up in the stigma that, oh man, I don't need therapy, I just need to figure it out on my own. And sometimes people can't figure it out on their own, and if anything, they just suppress it, or they try to stuff it down, but eventually that stuff's going to come to surface, and innocent people, or people that really care about you, are the ones that are going to get the brunt of it.
right. So sometimes I try to demystify this idea of therapy being, for those who have lost their minds. And, like you said, the stigma, using metaphors, just like we go to a PPO, primary care physician, to take care of whatever is ailing us. It's
Right.
no different than our own mental health, our relationships. So I try to neutralize or normalize the conversation that we take care of other parts of ourselves. Why not our mental health? Why not our emotional self? And
Mm,
sometimes that works, and then if not, then we can unpack what it is about considering therapy. What is the root of that? What are you feeling? What are you thinking about? Um, do you feel like there might be a breach of confidentiality? Getting into those conversations about how there again you're safeguarded as an individual who's seeking therapy. I think it's one of the most confidential practices you could have, and it's almost like going to see. Well, I won't say that because that may have some negative connotations tied to it. But it's very much a private interaction. Typically, in a counseling office, there are not a lot of folks sitting in the waiting room. Maybe one. My experience is you have one client, unless you're in a practice with other practitioners. But if
Right.
you're going to see someone that is just them, it's just you walking through the door. You hardly ever see an exchange of someone else. And so, of course, as counselors and clinicians and therapists, we are, as part of our practice, we are sworn to confidentiality. Unless there is self harm or harm to others, then by law, we have to let someone else know. But, for our clients, unless they take it out, it doesn't leave the session.
mm.
Mm.
So
And
sometimes just educating folks around what it actually looks like can debunk and start to kind of release some of these ideas and these fears about going into counseling. Talking through. I typically do a consultation with my potential clients to give them an idea of what's going to happen when we come into session. Especially for those who have not had therapy before, and sometimes for those who have, because the way I do therapy may be different from the last clinician.
okay, well, when do you think it's best to split? So, we talked about being proactive, get a therapist we can both relate to as a couple. But do
Mhm.
you think there's a time when individual counseling trumps going as a couple while you're in, this relationship?
So I'm probably a little biased about that that question.
Therapists
I-
can be biased. What?
right? Yeah. Um,
I didn't know that.
I feel like individual counseling is always in order because you're always with yourself, right? Even when you're
Hmm.
in relationship, the relationship you have with yourself trumps, that's the word you use, trumps all other
Hmm.
relationships because, within and then without. So I would say even before, hopefully even before getting into relationship, maybe the individual has therapy because we all have things we have to work through. A lot of childhood past stuff, to get us to where we are and understanding who we are, and developing those practices of self-love, taking care of ourselves before we get in with others. Now, that's not to say that we have to be perfect, before we get into relationship, because there is a lot of conversation around self-love and, making sure these things are in order and healing yourself and all of that. You can do that with a spouse. You can do that with a partner. That doesn't have to happen exclusively, right? It can
Right.
happen together. I am a fan of a writer called Young Pueblo. I don't know if you've heard of
Hmm.
him. He
Love
is
his work.
he is amazing, and he has a lot to say about relationship, especially in regards to your individual self and then with others. Um, and I just posted something on Facebook the other day. I came across it, and I thought, man, this is perfect. I got to share it with the world. He says, it's not about finding a partner who has flawless emotional maturity. It is about finding someone who can match your level of commitment,
Oh man, that's deep.
Mm,
right?
Wow.
Not just to the relationship, but commitment to heal themselves so that they can love better, see more clearly, and have more presence,
Wow.
I love it. I love
right?
Yeah,
it.
we're definitely about that life. We like to really get philosophical and deep, and we love to reflect on things. Cyndi, I want to pick your brain on something because In the first part of the couples therapy podcast that we did, we discussed that sometimes no matter what therapy you do, it's not going to solve real compatibility issues. Can you give us some examples of what is just a problem of compatibility that therapy just won't fix, regardless of, you know, how many times and how many sessions you go? Do you have any examples off the top of your head, or maybe some
Yeah.
context that you could give us with that?
Yes, I do have some context. I think sometimes it's really important for us to understand commonalities with compatibility. I think sometimes those terms seem to be synonymous, and they're not. Having commonalities or just, the same interest. When we
Right.
talk about being compatible, that stretches into your capacity to compromise, right?
Ooh.
It also speaks to, do I just enjoy my person at base, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do I like to be around them? That's more when we think about being compatible. So I think it's important to know and keep those terms separate, because you don't always have to enjoy everything your person enjoys. You may entertain that enjoyment for them, right? Just to go
Right.
out to a ball game if you both aren't necessarily into sports or skating or whatever it may be. But the capacity to compromise, the capacity to understand, the capacity to be just in company is so important. I don't really work with couples, but I work with individuals. Um, and many of them come into session being booed up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
What does that look like these days?
That
Having a
looks like,
boo.
oh my gosh, that looks like sometimes it is situationships.
Yeah. Oh,
It-
we've done a
Oh, we already
podcast
did
on
that
that.
show.
right, right. But for those who, traditionally are booed up or in coupleship, some of the things I see are the evolution of one moving ahead, not to say that it's higher or lower, right? But different, right? So you might have somebody who is doing their work, their healing work. And so
Right.
they're experiencing and seeing life different. And so they're conveying this information back to their partner who is not able to be on the same frequency of this new evolution. And so sometimes it's that, it's just not being always equally yoked. And so this is when the skill of capacity and compromise comes in. Can you compromise? Can you be um, encompassing of this other person? Sometimes it comes to that I am no longer looking for the person I have, that I've commuted myself to. I no longer want that person. What can I do?
Mm.
You mean were you kind of falling out of love, or you're just not into them or attracted to
Hmm.
them, or is that what you're kind of hinting?
Yes, all those things.
Oof, that's
Mm.
deep.
Yeah, it is
Right.
deep.
That's what I was just sitting here thinking. I was like, um, I have had partners where I felt like they didn't like me after a certain point. Like you said, when the euphoria, like the desire, lust, whatever those things were that pulled you together, seemed to kind of settle into the mist. Like,
Hmm.
what's left? Like, do I like that person if sex were off the table? If there was no lust involved,
Right.
would I want to do anything with this person? Do I laugh with this person? Sometimes I think, and I am guilty of being an overthinker. Sometimes I think I probably go too far and don't ask the right questions. But, now I've gotten to a place where, you know, do I have any fun with this person? Do I enjoy their company? Do our conversations scratch more than just the same superficial, what'd you do today? How was your day? Like, if I can only ask you things that I could ask a stranger, then maybe we need to reevaluate. Even with friendships, it's not just with a romantic relationship, but any relationship. Like, if we've hit a wall in what we can talk about, like what our
Hmm.
actual topics are,
Hmm.
then I'm beginning to start to evaluate now, like, do I need to just reposition this relationship for a while? Maybe we need a break. Maybe we need to, you know, talk through some stuff, or, has distance crept in because we're growing differently? How do you really help people pinpoint, um, like, their next move? I mean, I know, as I've been to therapy enough times to know the therapist isn't really directing you as much as they're helping you to figure out what you want from the
Exactly.
situation. But, what are ways that you help clients discover? Because I think for people out there listening, determining if therapy is right for them or not, if it's something they should even consider, I think that would be a good way to help, again, demystify why therapy can be useful as a tool and not what people think it is.
Right. So what I hear in that question, Nelsa, is kind of coming back into a grounding space, because sometimes we can be overthinkers,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're looking at others and comparing. And then not only are we doing that, sometimes we have a narrative running that's not realistic, of what
Mm-hmm.
this relationship is supposed to be like. So I typically will bring my client back into a grounding space and ask them, do you still like the person, first of all?
Mm.
Mm.
And if they can't answer that, well, what was it about this person that you liked or like? And maybe you just are not in touch with that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because all relationships fall into a lull,
Mm-hmm.
that's just part of living.
Right.
Um,
Cycles.
yes, yes. So in the long stretch, you will see that. And I think normalizing that sometimes can be, rescuing of that relationship, if you will, when you normalize that, oh, it's normal to be in a lull. How long have you been together? What has that relationship been through? What are the stages of the relationship? And what is the work that you're putting towards it?
Mm.
Because sometimes we
Yeah.
forget that, we get used to our person and we start coasting.
Mm-hmm. Taken for granted.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to put the work in.
Cyndi, let me ask you something. So, when you're helping somebody with therapy, or with the sessions, and they approach to you that, hey, I'm considering starting a relationship, or I'm putting myself out there to date, what do you recommend them as far as tactics or approach for somebody who is either suffering from mental illness, or who is actively in therapy and also trying to simultaneously date, or into a romantic relationship with someone? What is your feedback, or some techniques that you share with your patients as they go through that process and journey?
Mm-hmm. So I think what I hear is, identifying old patterns.
Mm,
Mm.
Uh-huh.
that's
And
hard to
so,
do.
yeah, it is hard to do, and it's intentional. So, in doing that, many times I have my clients to bring 2 or 3 relationships. And so we start to delve into those relationships, seeing what were the commonalities, what were the things that were attractive, and how did they serve the client? And then we together determine, was that a good serving or not so good serving? Did it move you closer to your highest and best self or away from it? And sometimes we don't even realize who our highest and best self is, because the pattern has been so functional in our lives. We think that is it,
Mm.
until we look at, the individual life and see, well, is it being positively impacted or not? And teasing that out. So your question was, what are some of the things you do? That's one of them. We want to break the cycles that don't work for us, but that's really some deep work to do that, and
Mm-hmm.
it takes a brave, encouraged heart to do so.
Right.
I know we're talking about therapy, and I am not a miracle worker. It's all about the readiness of the client when they show up. How authentic can they be, in session? Because, if somebody brings in lies and not the truth, then, that's not going to further their progress. So the more authentic you can be about who you are, and be able to look at that in a non-judgmental space, because that's what I try and create with my clients, so that they can bring out areas that are hard, and know that I'm there supporting them, without judgment. This is not going outside of our session, so that they feel safe. That is so important so that we can do the inner work, so we can perform surgery on ourselves and take these parts out that are very painful, and having space to grieve those parts, let those parts go, as we get into relationships with others. Because as we're looking for healthy humans, we also want to be as whole as possible.
Mm.
And
And I
I,
think you
Absolutely.
attract where you are. I
yeah,
say that all the time.
absolutely. I believe that too. And the more whole you are, in perception, because I really believe we are whole beings, period, right?
Hmm.
Even when we come to therapy, we are still whole beings. Sometimes our perception of ourselves and our narration of ourselves is the part that's hurt and injured. So restoring that, will allow us to be able to see through that lens and be able to see other people. Nelson, I know you mentioned something earlier about, these questions, how deep should I go? Um, as deep as you need to. The ways that we show up with people, being authentic and asking what we need of them really starts to set a standard of, this is who I am and this is what I would like to know of you. Now, of course, in the first couple of days, we're not going to come in with 20 questions, just, like,
Yeah, please do not come in like
We're not doing
HR
you
on an
21
know,
interview.
questions, 50 Cent style.
Look,
right. And shooting them off like bullets,
thank
like,
you.
Lord, I just want to
If
do
you
an
want to get rid of a
interrogation.
date, do
Right. We don't
that.
want to interrogate people.
Look, if you like, no, this ain't gonna work out, bring the
Right.
questions out at that
Next.
point.
Right.
Don't
Yeah.
flip
No
out on the chat. Just
interrogations.
ask them
Yeah.
20
No
questions.
interrogations. But we definitely want to get to knowing someone, and it takes time. I have a lot of clients that come in and say, how did I not see that? How did I miss that red side? How did I miss that? And many times,
Drunken
y-
love, or
yes,
lust, drunken
yes,
lust, right?
Blame it on the
yes,
alcohol. All
all
that.
of those things, yeah, can distort, or it will give us that whole grace. Oh, I see it, but I see all
Hmm.
this other stuff. So you put that one thing to the side, thinking, okay, that minimizing it, right?
Yep.
But you did see it.
Hmm.
You did see it, and you chose not to look at it because the person was showing these things. So, even getting into that and forgiving ourselves, because sometimes we get hooked on, why didn't I see that? And we beat ourselves up. And it's like, well, the reason why you didn't see it is because, one, you really wanted this to work and you saw these other things.
Cindy, so another thing that I wanted to touch that I see a lot. So, and I hear this from a lot of people in my circle, and I would probably say that women tend to kind of struggle with this more than men, in my opinion. This is my opinion. I don't have anything of fact, but I would say that when a woman has been in a long-term relationship for a long time or been married for a long time, it can be a tougher adjustment for a woman to be comfortable and single. And I notice that a lot of women will jump on the next guy that shows up for something serious, even though they haven't let go of the past, they haven't properly healed or even self reflected on what transpired with their previous relationship or marriage. I'd like your input or take on that, as far as what do you recommend as a healthy way to shed some of those scars and some of those traumas from a prior relationship before trying to enter the dating world and a new relationship.
So I see it with both men and women. But I think what I hear is that because we typically, women have been taught and conditioned that we need to be secured by someone else, um, and that we are, some of these thoughts come from just the way we are taught as women, that we're fragile, that we are weaker, that we need to be secured. And so we look for that. And so you're right, that can be the driver to find someone else, because society says sometimes we don't have an identity
Right.
unless we are with a person,
Mm.
with a
Mm.
man. That's where we get our value,
Right.
and unfortunately, many times that's where we get our identity. So, how to heal yourself or how to heal before entering or feeling the need to enter into another relationship for those reasons is to really grow up into yourself. And that's not easy when for like you said, for years have been thinking that my value, that my identity is only there if I'm connected to another person.
Mm.
So it's bringing that idea into awareness and then moving through how can I be strong about who I am? How can I lean into myself and know that I'm okay? Without going to the other side of, I don't need anybody in my life.
Right.
Right.
It's a
Exactly.
balancing act, right?
Extremes.
Because we don't want to go one extreme or the other because I don't know if that mentality is a good one where, hey, I don't need a man.
It's not,
Because I think that can also scare men away or intimidate men, right? If a woman is too independent, that can turn off a lot of men, and then that can, make it difficult to find a suitable mate because then at that
or you're
point,
closed. You're closed. And not only are you closed to finding a suitable mate, you're close to any help the universe might send to you,
mm,
Mm.
whether that's for your job, whether that's for your children. If you have an idea or a mindset that I don't need anybody,
oh man,
then you're telling the universe, don't send me no help. Let me just do all this myself.
Mm.
And so your life is going to be harder. You might have
Listen,
some sister friends, you might have some family, you might have a guy that's been looking at you or a woman that's been looking at you that you're sending out these messages that I got this. I don't need help from anybody.
blocking your
Because it's,
blessings.
yes.
Hmm.
So, Jorge,
Um,
I see that, transcending not only men and relationships, romantic relationships, but in every relationship.
agreed, absolutely.
well, and I
Mhm.
wanted to piggyback on that because in my experience, um, I've seen some men who do go to the other extreme, Poppy, where, they've been hurt, they've, had women cheat,
Very
um,
insecure. Yeah.
mother issues,
Yep.
and they go to the extreme of, I'm just gonna have a good time. I'm just here to kick it. Let's just chill. Very non-committal.
Yeah.
Very, I don't want to commit to
Oh, I've heard those
somebody.
words before.
Thank you. Right. I'm sure you've never said them.
I mean,
But
listen. At least I'm honest about it. I'm very. I will never. Nelson, you can check me on this. You know me. You know
absolutely,
me well. I will
you,
keep it a buck.
you do keep it. You keep it 100 all day, every day. But I just say to be fair, like just because, and I've seen some men who don't even have a month go by before they have already found their next person,
Yeah.
already got her lined up in the rotation. And
Yes.
so to me that screams somebody who really needs to go to therapy because you have not even closed the door good on one
Right.
relationship before
Yes.
you're flying into another. And it's almost like this need to be rescued or this need to be validated or so many different
Well,
things. I'm
part
sure you know
of it,
better.
I think, Nelson, part of that is that men aren't allowed to be emotionally vulnerable. Our society doesn't allow that.
Hmm.
So, in their way
Agreed.
of
Yep.
right, in their way of dealing with the
We've been
loss,
conditioned. We've been conditioned to not cry, not show
absolutely
those
Like,
kind of
yeah, women
vulnerable
get in the
emotions.
relationship. Yeah.
right, which is just absurd because
Yeah.
men are human, just like we are. They have
Right.
emotions. All the energy that it takes to not feel them, all the energy, and that's why they detach and, like you said, just kind of wild out sometimes. Or in order not to suffer that emotional distress and grief and loss, they'll find somebody else. Statistically, it's known that men, when they become widows within a year, typically will remarry, um, because it's the grief portion, it's the loss portion
Mm,
that they have not been equipped or given them permission to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
and what that should look like. Women can wail out in the street. We can cry with our girlfriends. We
Mm-hmm.
can be really sad about things, but we expect our men just to man up.
Get
Not
over it.
to
Get
show.
over it,
Yeah,
basically.
Push
yeah,
through.
yeah. Push through.
Build the bridge and get
Mm-hmm.
over it.
Yes. So I think that could be part of the reason why men will find replacements or move on to women quickly, because they have not been allowed to grieve in the past and to know what that feels like.
Right. And a balance of, I think, which, this is a whole nother topic, but, that masculine and feminine energy, like people think
Mhm.
we all have just the one or the other, but we all have both.
Right.
And when we're out of balance, then it really does make us make decisions that aren't necessarily best for us in our whole self. We might be choosing what's best for our ego or what's best for that, you know, that hurt feminine. I wanted to receive, but you know, I couldn't. I had to always be, you know, on the go, on the grind, getting after it. And I think again, why we felt like this show was so important to have a therapist is there's so many people out there, um, either doing what they've seen in their homes, um, doing what they've seen, out on social media or, television or whatever, the idea of these fairy tale relationships. And then when they
Mhm.
don't work, then, what do you see in the movies? People wild out.
Mhm.
Girls go through a whole phase, guys, out dogging women.
Yep.
But we are choosing such unhealthy ways to cope and to figure it out that we really want it. Poppy and I talk about communication being key all the time. Every show, I don't think we've had one show where communication has not come up as a real relevant point in a good relationship. And so we really wanted people to hear, like, if you've gone through any of these things, or if you're thinking any of these things, or if you don't know the answer to how to be in a good relationship, or why people keep leaving you, or why you keep leaving people, or
Mhm.
whatever, pick a thing, like therapy is really a great place to start. Because for me, I found, and I wasn't completely shocked, but a lot of my relationship patterns were based on things I had seen in my family. And
Mhm.
so being able to clear up, like, just because I saw that was my parents' coping mechanism or my grandparents' coping mechanism or whatever, didn't mean that that had to be mine
Right.
continually, because it wasn't
Yes.
working for me. So, just being able to break generational curses that have kept you locked and bound and unhappy is a great reason to go to
Yeah.
therapy.
The freedom to choose.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
just
The reason,
and just
the
because
ability to choose something different. Many times we feel like, okay, because we've been this person, we've done this thing for I don't know however long, we don't have the right to do something different.
Mm,
And we do.
and let's be real, like change is scary and old habits die hard.
Mhm.
And it takes bravery, right, to try to break a family custom or to do something new, right? Because you're venturing into the unknown, and oftentimes as humans we fear the unknown. But Cyndi, I want you to elaborate on something for an individual who is diagnosed, right, with mental health issues, right, but they want to
Mhm.
actively date. What would you give the person on the other end, right? What would be some advice that you would give them to be mindful of when dating somebody who struggles with anxiety or depression or schizophrenia or whatever mental health condition you want to put out there? What would be some healthy tips that you would give the other person that is on the other end trying to get to know and get close to a person who has the mental health struggles?
Mhm. I would say education,
Mm,
being educated on what it is
right.
and how it looks, how it can surface. Typically there's the classic symptoms that are displayed, but everybody's individual, so it may not be just like that.
It may
But
not be as blatant.
right. And communication. It's going to be so instrumental that the client or the person who's suffering with mental illness is consistent with their therapy. And if they're taking medication, if they're consistent and compliant with that to manage relationship, because relationship brings on stress. And when we're dealing with a mental health issue, those things, of course, make it worse, right?
Right.
So the more that we can be aware and in tune with each other when we are dating someone who may have a mental health issue, the better, the easier to make it. I mean, it can be a very tough, depending on the mental health issue, it can be a really tough situation. And a lot of times people leave because they don't have the coping skills to go the distance. Sometimes with those individuals, it takes a commitment, as all relationships do. But communication, definitely understanding what it is and what it looks like. If you have someone that goes to group therapy, then accompanying them to some of those group therapies to get an understanding of not only what it looks like for your person, but what it looks like in a group, and what conversations, come up in those groups, how they deal. That is very informative. That's very helpful. So that's what I would say, Jorge. First and foremost is to become educated about,
Right.
which is no different from any other condition.
Yeah, if
If you had
somebody's diabetic,
exactly.
I've had women that I've dated that, obviously, as I get to know them pretty early on, I let them know that I'm epileptic, so they'll ask a lot of questions, and some of them even take it upon themselves to do some digging, or as we spend more time, they'll ask me more questions about triggers, how long I've had it, and
Right.
they become more inquisitive, and that to me is attractive, right? Because I'm like, man, like she
They
took
care.
time out of her day
Mm-hmm.
to look into my well-being and my health. So that to me, if anything, is something beautiful to see, right? Because that shows me that, wow, this person is being genuine and showing genuine care for me, even
Yes.
though they're just getting to know me. So
Yeah. And sharing the plan of what do I do? If something happens,
right. Yep.
what is my role? What am I supposed to do?
Awesome. We've really touched on a lot of stuff tonight.
I love it. This is a great conversation.
Yeah,
Thank you for
absolutely.
having me.
Absolutely. But before we let you go, and definitely want to get your information out there, Cyndi, how people can find you if you're taking new clients. But any last advice on, managing a healthy relationship?
I would say last advice is to always be aware of who you are, right? Whatever greatness you have, whatever shortcomings you have, be aware of all those things because you're bringing that into the relationship. I always go back to before we can relationship with others, we relationship with ourselves. So the more aware we are, doesn't have to fix it, right? The better off the relationships will be.
Yeah, and some things, it's just something you just got to deal with. It may not be a
Go
long-term
away.
fix. It's just something we
Exactly.
have to roll with the punches. Like, for example, going back to my epilepsy, I can't fix it. That's just something I just got to deal with. And, you go on
Mm-hmm.
about your business and live, but there's
Right.
not a cure or a fix per se.
Perfect. That's a perfect example. Exactly. And we all have, whether it's emotional, whether it's a medical, we all are bringing something in with us. So as long as we're aware and know how to care for ourselves, then that's going to make that coupleship stronger.
Love
It's
it.
hurtful when you're coming in with things that you're not aware of. Maybe you're speaking in a way that's demeaning or condescending, and you're just not aware how you're coming off. So then that's impacting your relationships, romantic and all of them. So the more aware we are, then that puts us and posits us in a position to care for others and to care for whatever that is that we're bringing with us.
Imagine
Love it.
that.
I love it. How can people, first of all, tell people your practice, Cyndi, how they can get in touch with you?
Sure. If anyone is looking for a therapist, I specialize in grief and loss. I love working with Black women overcoming everyday obstacles and seeing their highest and best selves. You can reach me either through my email, innersation, That's INNEVERSATION@gmail.com. I believe if we heal the conversation within, it makes us better whole people. You can also reach me through text at 919-299-0970.
Awesome. And we will definitely have this in the show notes for
Absolutely.
people. It's wonderful conversation with you, Cyndi. And I love the name of the practice, interversation, as opposed to conversation, right? That
Clever.
inner
I like it.
conversation. I love it. Talk to yourself, people.
Yeah, we do. Whether we know it or not, we got a constant conversation going on with them. We want it to be as healthy as possible.
Ooh, yes.
Facts.
Yes. But anyway, thank you everyone for joining us again. Wonderful conversation. Thank you, Cyndi, for joining the conversation today. And Poppy, what do you got for the people?
Hey, buenas noches. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please check out the YouTube channel, Spotify, like us, comment, subscribe, and thank you so much for the love and support. Buenas noches. Thanks for joining us today on the Relationship Cycle with Jorge and Nelsa. Do you have show ideas? Email us at jorgeandnelsa@gmail.com. Follow us on Spotify or anchor.fm for more great shows.